Hello Stitchers! This is Anne from Lolli and Grace, and welcome to this tutorial about how to transfer an embroidery design onto dark fabric. Now if you're like 95% of the people out there, you don't really like to transfer patterns onto the fabric. I know, I get it. It's tedious. I'm the same way. I just want to get to the fun part with the pretty threads and the fun stitches and all the pretty colors. But you got to get a pattern on there somehow, right? And the method that I use most of the time when I'm using a light colored fabric is to, I'll just quickly go over that method, is to print out the fabric, print out the design, cut it out, stretch my fabric on the hoop, tape the pattern behind the hoop, and then shine a bright light behind it and trace it on. And you can very easily see, even a kind of an intricate pattern like this, you can see all these dark lines and you can trace it onto the front of your fabric. But if you have a fabric that is a little bit different, that you cannot see the lines through the fabric if you shine a light behind it, you need to use a different method. And I found this method to be very accurate, and it just has a couple of steps to it, and so it's not that hard, and it works really well. So let me talk about the fabric first of all. The one I'm going to be using today is a quilting cotton, but it's this gray. And I could probably get by with tracing it on with a bright light, but I just wanted to make sure that I got all this detail and I wasn't struggling too much. So that's why I'm using this method. If you are using, like, stitching on a linen fabric is really, really wonderful, but it presents a couple of issues. Tends to be a little bit thicker sometimes, and it very often will have a texture to it. And that kind of nubby texture can present a problem when you're trying to shine a light through it from behind and see through it, because all that texture shows up as all these crisscross lines and it interferes with you seeing these lines. So, like, here's a linen that is dark, so it has sort of a double whammy. It's dark, well, triple whammy. It's dark, it's a little bit thicker, and it has the texture. But even on a linen like this one, which is a light color, if this was just in a regular cotton fabric, this color would not be any problem at all to shine the light behind it and trace. But it is thicker, and if you can see how it has that very textured, nubby effect to it, that's going to be really almost impossible. You're just not going to be able to see a pattern from behind with a bright light. So let's use this method. The supplies you will need: the fabric, obviously, a hoop. You will need a ballpoint pen. You'll need a white gel pen. You'll need the pattern printed onto paper. And you will need white graphite paper. And this is like an artist's graphite paper. It is used to transfer line work onto wood or metal or paper. And I will probably refer to it as carbon paper half the time. So, but anyway, technically the package says graphite paper, and it works just like a carbon paper. It has the paper side, and then on the other side it has, it's almost like a waxy, chalky, coating on it. So let me talk briefly about, just very quickly, let me talk about the hoop. I carry these hoops in my shop. I love them. They're so nice. They have really nice brass hardware, and that's what the screwdriver is here for, so that when I'm tightening my fabric, I can put the screwdriver in there and I can tighten it down really tightly. And that is important because you want your fabric stretched very tightly. I know this isn't about fabric stretching, but let me just get my plug in here for always making sure your fabric is stretched super, super tight in the hoop. That makes everything easier. Tracing or transferring the pattern on will be more accurate. Your stitches will be more accurate, and you won't constantly be tugging on the fabric. And so using a good quality hoop can help that. Also, if you notice, I have the inside of this hoop wrapped with cotton twill tape. And cotton is important because you don't want it to be something slick. But I've just wrapped it and I've hot glued it here on both ends, and I've just made sure it's smooth all the way around. And then what that does is that allows the inner and outer hoops to squeeze the fabric more tightly, and it gives this inner hoop a little bit more grip. That's why you don't want to use like a shiny ribbon. So that once I pull it tight, this way, and then I stretch it and then I tighten it right here, that fabric stays like a drum the entire time I'm working. So no more struggling to keep my fabric tight. So let's get down to the details about exactly how to do this process. And I have now stretched my fabric in the hoop, and you can see that it is absolutely as tight as it can be. I've also trimmed it off, and I have used pinking shears, scalloped pinking shears, to trim off the fabric so that all that fabric doesn't get in my way and so it doesn't unravel. And I have cut out my pattern, and I have also cut out a circle of carbon paper. And the way, the size that you want to do is you're going to flip the hoop over and figure out a size that fits right inside the hoop. And you don't really want it to climb up the edges. And you also want to make sure that it is big enough that it covers all the way to the edge of where your design goes. So this one works out that if I just kind of do it just a teeny, you could, let me get this out of here. Once you cut this out, cut this circle out, you can cut this circle just a little tiny bit smaller than this circle. So now that I have those, the method is to, there's my top, and I'm going to place the graphite paper onto the back side, or well, onto this side of the fabric. And let me talk quickly here. I like to stitch with my fabric, with my hoop and my fabric facing up like this. Some people are happy stitching like this. It doesn't really matter. It's whatever works for you. But I just generally prefer to have my fabric facing like this as I'm stitching. But when I am transferring the design with this method, I need to flip it over so that I can have this on a hard surface, so that when I am tracing this design, I can press down really hard. If I was tracing it like this and I press down, the fabric, even though it's really tight, it has a little bit of give to it, and I'm not going to get as good of a transfer. So for now, I'm going to transfer it like this. After it's all finished, all transferred, I will flip the fabric this way, and then I'll begin stitching. So first step, flip the hoop over. Take your carbon paper, and you'll need to figure out which side is which side is the graphite side and which is the paper side. And if you just feel it with your fingers, this side, the graphite side, has a little bit of it's not sticky, but it's just a little bit, tiny bit waxy. And this side is real smooth, and your finger glides right over it. So those creases won't matter. So I'm going to just place that centered like that, making sure it's right in the center. And now I'm going to take my, also let me show you this. This is a previous piece of graphite paper that I have used, and you can reuse these. It will still, the more you use it, the less of the graphite is going to transfer. But maybe you can, I don't know if you can see that, hopefully, but you can see how I've got I think I've used this one at least twice. And you can see how the design they just trace right over each other, and it worked out fine. I could probably get, maybe depending on how dense the design was that I was tracing, I could maybe get one or two more transfers out of this. So don't feel like you have to use this and then toss this one and use it again. You can keep using this until it's just not showing up anymore. But for this demonstration, I wanted you to really be able to see what I was doing. So I'm using a fresh piece of graphite paper. Now I'm taking my printed design, and I'm going to lay it on top. And I am picky about how my transfer, I think it goes just like that. I like it to be centered. I know it's just a thing with me. So I am centering that, and now with the pattern facing up, now there's one other supply I forgot to tell you you're going to need, and that is just 3 or 4 pieces of this tape, because I need to tape this in place. So I'm going to put it on the paper, rub my finger, rub it on the inside of the hoop, the top of the hoop, and then stick it onto the paper. I just don't want this to shift while I am tracing. And I'm going to try not to cover up too much of the lines, although it doesn't really matter. You could cover that with the tape, and it's just not going to really get in the way. but you know, 3 pieces is plenty. I just have made sure that I have right here, I've really pressed it down hard onto the fabric, and I've pressed it down really hard on the inside of the hoop and on the top. If I just kind of slapped a piece of tape on there, then this could still shift a little bit, and you don't want it shifting. You want it to stay in place the whole time you are working. For the next step, you're going to need a little bit of hand strength, because what we're going to do is we're going to use our ballpoint pen to trace over these black lines, and we're going to push hard enough so that the graphite, transfers onto the fabric. Now the fabric, even though it's a smooth fabric, it's just a teensy bit rough, and you're going to feel that as you're tracing. And the reason we're using a ballpoint pen is because it has a rounded, a ball point, and so you can push really hard, but it's not going to tear the paper. You could probably use a pencil, but if I had a pencil that was like super sharp that I just sharpened and I was pressing really hard, first of all, I might break off the tip of the pencil, and I might also tear the paper. So that's why a ballpoint, just a regular old cheapy ballpoint pen, is great for this. And I printed this out in black, and I have done it before where if you have access to printing your own patterns, on your printer, I switch the color. I either reduce the opacity or I make it like a very light pink so that when I am tracing, I can see where I've traced. But I didn't do that here. That's fine, not a problem. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to hold this down, and I'm going to trace over the lines, pressing very, very firmly. Okay, I'm really pressing down hard. And I've traced over these lines. I'm going to trace over everything on here, and the reason that I sometimes print it in a different color, because sometimes it's a little bit hard to tell where you have traced or where you have not traced. But just take a good look at it after you trace everything with the ballpoint pen. It also helps. I'm using a blue ballpoint so I can tell what's blue versus black. But I'm going to take a really hard look at it after I've traced all of these lines, pressing down very firmly, which is why, like I said, I needed it to be flipped this way so I could really press down hard. Trace over all your lines, take a good hard look at it, make sure you've traced over everything, and then we will move on to the next step. One other quick note that I wanted to mention before I move on is that the surface, the table underneath, is important too, because you are pressing so hard, and it's just going through this fabric. You want to have a nice hard surface underneath your hoop. If you're using this pen and pressing down really hard, and if you have like a wooden table, you could easily leave an indentation in that wooden table. And this is actually a piece of like almost like foam core, and it's sort of soft. And if I were to proceed, I would not do it on here. I'm going to move this, and I'm going to use my work table that has a really nice hard surface that's not going to be ruined by pressing really hard as I trace all of these lines. All the lines are traced with the ballpoint pen, but before I just rip off this paper and the carbon or the graphite paper, I'm going to do a little check first. I'm going to carefully lift up the edge here, and sometimes it's hard to get your fingernail under there, so I just am using a needle. And I'm going to pull up both the graphite paper and the printed pattern, and I'm going to check to see if my lines did transfer. And I'm going to put my hand behind it so you can see, so it's dark. So hopefully see those lines right there. They're very faint, but they're there. So that tells me that I put the graphite paper down with the correct side down, and that I pressed hard enough to see those lines. And now I will go ahead and take off the paper, the printed pattern, and the graphite paper. Now that I've taken off the pattern and the graphite paper, there's all of my lines that have been transferred on. But there's one more step I need to do. I need to go over those lines with the white gel pen. And the reason is, yes, I can see these, especially if you put something dark behind it, so there's no light shining behind it. So yes, I can see these lines, but they are a little bit faint. And if you wanted to start stitching right now, you could definitely do that. This graphite doesn't, it sort of rubs off. It's not, it doesn't, it's not like chalk where it's going to just completely disappear if you like barely rub it. But it's pretty light, and I don't want to struggle the whole time I'm stitching this to see those faint lines. And particularly as you get more stitches on, it's a little hard to see the fainter lines next to what you're stitching. So I like to go over it with the white gel pen. Let me talk to you for just a moment about the white gel pen. These are great. It's an opaque ink, so that's why it shows up on dark fabrics. They're great for paper as well, but they can be a little bit finicky. So when I store these, I store them with the tip down so that the ink is always down here in the tip. If you store it up, it can kind of go down to the other end of the pen, and it's kind of hard to get that ink flowing. And talking about getting the ink flowing, I always keep a little piece of, it doesn't have to be the same color of fabric, and it could even be a piece of paper, but if you have a little scrap of the same fabric that you're stitching on, that works too. So before I get going, I will make a few lines, and you can see that it's not showing up really great at the beginning. So if you kind of keep making some lines, it gets a little bit brighter as you are working with it. And sometimes as I'm tracing over those lines, I will come back over here, or I'll wipe the tip off because that ink can get a little bit dry. But generally, if you store them with the tip down, they work pretty well, and I don't have a whole lot of trouble with them. So now all there is to do is just carefully go over the lines that I traced with the graphite paper. And sometimes I will go over the lines twice if I really want it to be brighter, a brighter white. And at first you might not think that it's really tracing, or it's not making much of a difference. But if you compare it to the kind of light lines that were left from the graphite paper, you can definitely see that it's brighter. And once I've gone over all these lines, I have never had any trouble being able to see it while I'm stitching. So let me bring that up to you so you can see it. So see the difference between the graphite lines and the gel pen lines. So it's really worth just a little bit of time to go over it with the white gel pen. Another consideration of the white gel pen is that it is permanent. Neither the graphite lines or the gel pen lines are going to wash out. They're not going to disappear with time, and you can't use heat to get them out. They are permanent. So I trace very carefully, and I mean, here I flubbed up, but it's not going to matter. It's all going to be covered with stitching. But if I have like a line where the stem is going to be, I make sure to trace very carefully, both with the graphite paper and now again with the gel pen, so that I am going to be able to stitch over that line and cover it completely throughout the whole pattern while I'm stitching, because these lines will not go away. I have finished tracing over the graphite lines with the gel pen, and this is what it looks like. So if you are someone who likes to stitch with the hoop facing this way, then you can just get stitching just like this. If you're like me and you like to stitch with the hoop on this side, then all you need to do is just take the fabric out, restretch it, and you are ready to go. So I thank you for joining me for this tutorial, and I will see you next time.